A judge thought he was being clever playing truth or lie with a 12-year-old girl until she flipped the courtroom upside down. The courtroom in Toledo, Ohio was colder than it needed to be, not just from the overworked air conditioning that hummed too loud for comfort, but from the way people looked at Imani Jefferson like she was a fragile exhibit behind glass. She sat still, hands folded tightly in her lap, wearing that yellow cardigan she always wore when she was nervous. Her foster mom had ironed it the night before, even though Ammani told her not to. It didn't matter. 12 years old, barely 5 feet tall, bright brown eyes that looked too calm for her age. The courtroom was half full. A few reporters, some caseworkers. Her foster parents, Deborah and Stan Greer, sat on the left side of the room. On the right, a woman with tight curls and a stiff red blazer clutched a tissue in one hand and a manila folder in the other. Ammani knew her name was Celeste Boone, her biological aunt. She'd met her twice, once at a supervised visit, once at a diner where Celeste spent most of the time arguing with the waitress about how cold the fries were. Ammani didn't like being here, but she understood exactly why she was. Judge Gerald Norwood, in his 60s with a pair of reading glasses hanging from his neck, sat on the bench like he'd done it 1,000 times, and he probably had. He looked at Ammani like she was a chess piece that didn't belong on the board. "Miss Jefferson," he said, shuffling a few papers before leaning in slightly. "I understand this is unusual. Having a child testify in a custody dispute isn't something I take lightly." "I understand," Ammani replied, voice steady. Norwood looked up, surprised by the firmness in her tone. He wasn't the only one. The court had expected nerves, maybe even tears, but Ammani didn't fidget, didn't avoid eye contact. She just waited, calm, prepared, like someone who had already imagined this scene 100 different ways. The courtroom whispered, a cough, a pen clicking, someone's phone vibrating and quickly silenced. Norwood cleared his throat. "You seem pretty sharp," he said, trying to loosen the mood. "I imagine you do well in school." "I do all right," she replied. He chuckled. "Modest, too." Then a pause. "Tell me something, just for fun. Ever sneak a cookie before dinner?" Ammani tilted her head as if dissecting the question. "That's a leading question, Your Honor. You're implying I have, rather than asking if I did." Someone in the gallery coughed into a laugh. Norwood raised his eyebrows. "Well then," he said, "how about we play a little game to loosen things up? I ask a few questions. You tell me, truth or lie?" Ammani looked around the room once, then nodded. "Okay, but I might ask questions too." He blinked. "Fair enough." But from the moment the first question left his mouth, the judge realized this wouldn't be a game. But Ammani wasn't here to play. She was here to change everything. Judge Norwood leaned back, a faint smile playing on his face. Maybe he thought he was being clever, or maybe he was just trying to break the ice in a room full of tension. Either way, he looked over his glasses and said, "All right, Miss Jefferson, truth or lie? You've stayed up past your bedtime more than once this week." Ammani didn't blink. "True, but I was reading the Family Law Journal of Ohio, 2022 edition." The courtroom chuckled again, softer this time, more confused than amused. Norwood squinted at her. "Family Law Journal, huh?" "Yes, sir. It's available online for public access," she said. "That's where I read about best interests of the child being the standard in custody cases." The judge cleared his throat, sitting up straighter now. "All right, how about this one? You've ever skipped school pretending to be sick?" "Lie," Ammani said flatly. "I haven't missed a day since 3rd grade." That's when attorney Benjamin Rourke, the lawyer for Celeste Boone, leaned forward. Thick-framed glasses, slicked back hair, and a confidence that had probably served him well until this very moment. "Your Honor, if we could return to the relevant facts." But Norwood raised a hand, silencing him without a word. His eyes were on Ammani. Something had shifted. He adjusted his seat again. "All right, my turn's up. Go ahead, Miss Jefferson, ask me one." Ammani paused, then said, "Truth or lie? You've already made a decision in your head about who I should live with." The room went still. Even Rourke sat back. Norwood hesitated, then gave a soft sigh. "Truth." Ammani nodded. "I figured." She looked toward her aunt. Celeste straightened, clearly feeling the attention now focused on her. "Truth or lie?" Ammani asked. "You told the caseworker you could provide for me better than the Greers because you make more money." Celeste blinked. True, she said slowly. That's a fact. Then why do the electric bills in your name show 4 late payments in the past 6 months? Ammani asked. The room gasped. Not dramatically, but just enough to feel it. Celeste's mouth opened, then closed. Ammani reached into the small tote bag beside her and pulled out a folded document. Public records. I looked them up last week at the library downtown. It's all there. Rourke stood up quickly. Objection. Your Honor, this is completely inappropriate. It's relevant, Norwood said, almost too quietly. Sit down, Mr. Rourke. Ammani's voice didn't waver. She turned back to the judge. Truth or lie? A child's voice should matter in decisions about their own life. He looked at her, long and hard. Truth, he finally answered. Ammani exhaled, her fingers finally relaxing in her lap. Then I'd like to speak. For real. Not about cookies, not games. Just the truth. The judge nodded once, slowly. The game was over. But what came next would no longer be in the adult's control. The court clerk scribbled something into her notepad. The stenographer's fingers didn't miss a beat. And Judge Norwood, now fully upright in his chair, motioned gently with his hand. You may speak, Miss Jefferson. Ammani took a second before answering. Not out of fear, she was just thinking. Lining things up. Not the way most kids might tell a story, wandering off into sidebars or pausing to check if someone was still listening. No. Ammani was surgical. I've lived in 6 homes in 7 years, she began, her voice clear and calm. Some of them were okay. One had a dog that liked to chew my socks. One smelled like onions and baby powder. One, she paused, locked their fridge after 5 p.m. There was no drama in her tone, no victimhood, just facts. But the Greers, she continued, glancing toward her foster parents, they're different. They didn't ask me what happened to me. They asked what I liked to eat, what books I liked. They didn't treat me like a case file. Deborah Greer wiped her eyes quietly. Stan held her hand under the table, trying to keep himself composed. Mrs. Boone, Ammani turned toward her aunt, you told my caseworker that you should have custody because you're blood, but you didn't come visit me until the court got involved. Celeste shifted, clearly uncomfortable. I'm not mad about that, Ammani said quickly. I'm just saying, I've had to take care of myself for a long time, so I notice when people show up because they have to, versus when they actually want to. Judge Norwood tapped his pen against his desk, but didn't interrupt. Ammani leaned forward slightly in her chair. Do you want to know why I started reading about family law? He gave a small nod. Because people kept making choices for me, without me. Grown-ups sitting in rooms just like this one, saying things like, she's too young to understand, or she'll adapt. But I understand more than you think. I know what stability looks like. I know what being scared feels like. I know when someone is lying, especially when they're smiling while doing it. No one said a word. She continued more softly now. I know this isn't just about who wants me. It's about who knows me, who sees me. The Greers know I hum when I read. They know I eat my pizza backwards. They know I collect used bus passes and keep them in a shoebox because, I don't know, it makes me feel like the places I've been actually mattered. That last part hung in the air longer than anything else. Rourke leaned into Celeste and whispered something, but she didn't respond. Then, unexpectedly, the judge leaned in and asked, How old were you when you learned how to read legal documents? Ammani looked at him without flinching. 9. I started with eviction notices. Judge Norwood stared at her. Something softened in his face, but not pity. It was recognition. He took a deep breath, then sat back. All right. Ammani, thank you. That was... He glanced at his notes, then back at her. Very helpful. She nodded. I'm not done. He blinked. You're not? No, sir. I'd like to address one of the affidavits in this case. It includes false information. The room stirred again. Rourke straightened in his seat. Which affidavit? The judge asked. Ammani reached into her tote again, pulled out a photocopy. This one, filed by Celeste Boone. She said she had a 2-bedroom apartment, but this lease form says she lives in a 1-bedroom unit, which means she would have had to convert the living room into a bedroom. Celeste's face flushed. That was a typo. It's not just that, Ammani cut in. The lease is dated 2 weeks after she filed the affidavit. Norwood narrowed his eyes. Is this document real? Yes, sir. I got it from the building manager. He let me see it because I told him I was verifying housing stability for court. I used my school ID. The courtroom wasn't whispering anymore. Everyone was just watching, listening. But Ammani wasn't finished dismantling the lies yet. She was just getting started. For a moment, the courtroom went quiet in a way that wasn't awkward, but necessary, like everyone needed a breath they'd forgotten to take. Ammani sat still, the lease still in her hand, not smug, not proud, just certain. Her fingers trembled slightly, but her voice hadn't. That mattered more. Celeste Boone sat back in her chair, arms crossed tight. Her eyes darted toward her attorney, who now looked visibly uncomfortable. He whispered something again. This time she nodded, but just barely. Judge Norwood scratched his temple with his pen, looking down at the copy of the lease Ammani had handed the bailiff moments earlier. Ms. Boone, he said carefully, is there anything in this document that is inaccurate? Celeste hesitated. No, but I didn't mean to mislead anyone. I just didn't think it would be a problem. I've made space for her. With a curtain separating the bed from the kitchen? Ammani asked, more out of curiosity than spite. Celeste sighed and looked away. That was the thing about silence. It didn't always mean guilt, but sometimes it was louder than any confession. Judge Norwood shifted gears. Imani, he said, you've clearly done your homework. You're very impressive. But what about the emotional side of this? Isn't it possible that your aunt deserves a chance to reconnect with her family? Ammani nodded. Yes, but reconnecting doesn't mean uprooting. It means visiting, calling, sending cards, even when there's no court date coming up. That landed harder than she expected. Celeste's lips parted slightly, like she wanted to argue, but she couldn't. Ammani continued. I know people say blood is thicker than water, but water keeps me alive. I don't need people who look like me. I need people who see me. That was the moment Deborah started crying, full on, no apology. Stan just reached over and pulled her close. Rourke finally stood up. Your Honor, this has become an emotional showcase, not a legal hearing. I understand the child is articulate, but this isn't about speeches. It's about facts and capability. Norwood didn't even look at him. She just gave us both. Ammani sat back, folding her hands again. She looked at the judge calmly. May I ask one more question, Your Honor? He nodded. Truth or lie, she said. You ever had to grow up before you were ready? Norwood stared at her. He didn't answer with words. He just gave a long, heavy blink and looked down at the desk. But what he didn't say told Ammani everything she needed to know. Outside the courthouse windows, the sun had started to shift. That late afternoon kind of light, bright but low, crawled through the glass and stretched across the courtroom floor like it was looking for something to hold on to. Ammani wasn't shaking, not anymore, but she felt the weight of every pair of eyes locked on her. She wasn't used to that, not like this, not in a way that demanded so much and gave so little back. Judge Norwood leaned forward again, elbows on the bench now. The casual tone he had used earlier was gone. His voice was more formal, measured. Miss Jefferson, he said, I have to make my ruling based on what is best for your long-term well-being. That includes emotional, financial, and physical stability, not just who presents themselves best today. I understand, she replied, but I needed to be heard today, not because I'm trying to win anything, but because sometimes the truth gets buried under paperwork. People forget there's a person inside the file. Celeste finally stood up. For the first time since the hearing started, she addressed Ammani directly. I didn't come earlier because I didn't know how to... I wasn't ready to be anyone's guardian. I was still figuring out my life. Ammani nodded once. I know. That's why I'm not angry. I just can't afford to be someone's learning curve. The room sank into another silence. The kind that made you feel small, even if you weren't the one on trial. Rourke looked like he wanted to intervene, but he didn't. Probably because nothing he said now could undo what had already been done. Norwood looked at Deborah and Stan. Mr. and Mrs. Greer, would you like to speak? Deborah shook her head gently. Stan cleared his throat, voice cracking a little. We came here prepared to fight, but she fought for herself. I think that says more about her than anything we could say about us. That sat heavy in the room, real heavy. Norwood turned his attention back to Ammani. You've read a lot of legal documents, right? Yes, sir. Then you'll know this decision won't come down today. I'll need to review the new evidence, reconvene, and make sure everything is handled the right way. I know, she said, standing slowly. But now, at least you really see me. That's all I wanted. She gathered her tote bag, slipping the lease document back inside like it was just another library paper. But it wasn't. It was a turning point. Whether the adults in the room were ready to admit it or not. She walked back toward the gallery, each step quiet but sure. But no one in that courtroom would ever see her the same way again. The court recessed, but no one moved right away. It was like the air had thickened, as if standing too fast might knock something fragile loose. Judge Norwood exited through his side door. The clerk followed. The only sounds left were the squeak of a chair and the scratch of someone's pen. Ammani sat beside Deborah and Stan now, small between them, but somehow towering over everything. Deborah leaned in. You okay, baby? Ammani nodded. Yeah, I'm okay. Just tired. Stan gave a little laugh. You cross-examined 3 adults and dismantled a housing claim in less than 20 minutes. That'd wear anybody out. Ammani cracked a tired smile, then looked down at her hands. Do you think he's going to send me away? Deborah opened her mouth, but Stan beat her to it. No one's sending you anywhere without a fight. And from what I just saw, you fight better than most adults I've ever met. Across the aisle, Celeste Boone sat alone. Rourke was at the far end of the room, whispering to someone on the phone. Celeste stared at her purse like it was supposed to give her answers. After a minute, she stood and walked slowly across the aisle. Imani, she said quietly. Deborah's eyes narrowed, but Ammani looked up. I want to say something, Celeste continued, not because I think it'll change anything, just because I should have said it before. Ammani tilted her head slightly. I wasn't ready, Celeste said, and I lied because I thought looking like I had everything together was more important than being honest. But you made me realize the truth matters more, even if it's ugly. Ammani didn't say anything right away. Then she asked, why do you want me? The question landed heavy. Celeste blinked, searching for something real to say. Because I didn't want my sister's child to grow up thinking no one in her family cared. That's not the same as wanting me, Ammani said. Celeste nodded slowly. I know. Deborah reached for Ammani's hand, but didn't pull her back. This moment wasn't hers. Celeste added, if the court decides you stay with the Greers, I'll respect that. But I'd still like to visit. No court orders, just you and me, when you're ready. Ammani studied her face, the kind of stare that wasn't rude, just thorough, the same way she read a document before she trusted what it said. Okay, Ammani said, we'll see. Celeste took a step back and gave her space. Later, in the hallway, the caseworker who'd been assigned to Ammani stepped beside her. Her name was Kendra Lawson, mid-30s, glasses always slipping down her nose. She'd seen a lot of cases, but none like this. You did something rare in there, Kendra said softly. Ammani shrugged. I told the truth. Yeah, Kendra said, but you didn't weaponize it. You used it like a mirror, made everybody take a look. Ammani glanced up at her. That's the only way it works, right? Kendra nodded, looking more like a witness than a worker now. By the time they stepped out into the late afternoon sun, the air felt different. Not easier, not clearer, but real. And that mattered. But what came next wouldn't just be up to the court. It would be up to Ammani, too. 2 weeks later, the ruling came in a plain envelope. No bold lettering, no drama. Just a name typed neatly across the front. Imani Jefferson. Inside, the judge's decision was laid out in clear, direct language. No fluff, no loopholes. The court granted permanent guardianship to Deborah and Stan Greer. There was no celebration, no balloons. Just a quiet moment at the Greers' kitchen table in their modest 2-bedroom home in Akron, Ohio. Ammani sat between them, the paper in her hand, eyes reading every line twice before letting herself believe it. I guess this means I can stop packing my bag every night, she said softly. Deborah reached over and gently brushed Ammani's shoulder. That bag can stay empty. You're home now. Stan raised his glass of orange juice. To the girl who beat the system with truth and a tote bag. They all laughed. A real one this time, not the courtroom kind. Ammani smiled, but her eyes stayed serious. Can we still visit Aunt Celeste? If she wants to? Of course, Deborah said. You get to choose what those visits look like. This isn't a wall, it's just the door you walked through. Ammani nodded. She didn't need revenge. She didn't need an apology wrapped in ribbons. She just needed consistency. And now she had it. Weeks passed. The tote bag stayed under her bed. The bus pass shoebox grew fuller. And one day, she handed Judge Norwood a handwritten letter through Kendra Lawson at a community outreach event. It read, "Thank you for not treating me like a child who talks too much. Thank you for listening when it mattered. I hope more kids get the chance to speak for themselves, not just be spoken for. Also, I was serious about cookies. I really never snuck one." No signature, just Ammani. And that was it. Not a story about a girl who found a home. A story about a girl who knew what one looked like and spoke until someone finally listened. But the truth is, kids don't need us to speak for them nearly as often as we think. They just need us to hand them the mic and step back. Kids like Ammani exist everywhere, in classrooms, courtrooms, group homes, and quiet corners of the world where people rarely ask what they think, but they know. They notice. And when they speak, we owe them more than applause. We owe them respect. If you're a teacher, a parent, a social worker, a judge, or just someone who interacts with young people, ask them. Listen like it's the most important thing you'll do that day, because it probably is. And if you're a kid like Ammani, don't wait for permission to tell your truth. Speak it, even if your voice shakes, especially then.